Hello and welcome on to the latest episode of Rovers Chat, joined as ever by Robbie Andrews of Radio Sheffield. Robbie, how are we doing?
Yeah, all good, Ricky. Thank you. A happy New Year to you as well.
Happy New Year to you. Hopefully it's a good New Year from this point onwards for Rovers. Obviously, a really bad end to 2025. We spoke, didn't we, on the last show about, I think it was the Plymouth game, the last game that they'd done at the time. It got slightly better than that, didn't it? I mean, it couldn't get much worse after that kind of horror show. But how do we look at it then in the last couple of matches? Because obviously finally ended that losing streak, which was important against Bolton. Obviously the Luton game got snowed off. But the Bolton game was the one, weren't it, where you could see kind of signs that hopefully a corner's been turned.
Yeah, there was a lot of control in that game, wasn't there, against a team who, going into it, were in the playoff places. I think Robbie in particular was a standout in that midfield area. I think he had a good game against Stockport as well on the Monday night. I think it was. Struggled to keep up with days, but defensive frailties let Rovers down against Stockport, didn't they? And in games previous as well. But I think against Bolton, with that control, defensive solidity was important to it. And the fact that they were able to, but for a fortunate goal that Bolton scored, there was nothing really for Ian Lawler to do. And I think that was probably the biggest positive to come out of it, as well as a first Rovers goal for Glenn Middleton, was that, lack of chances let up, if you like, because in games gone by, we saw Stockport score relatively straightforward goals, didn't we? Blackpool the same, Plymouth as well. A lot of goals that Rovers were conceding were just far too easy for the opposition. I think had Kyle Dempsey made better contact with that effort on goal, Ian Lawler probably has a better chance of saving it in a weird sort of way. But I think Grant McCann was very happy afterwards with what his side had sort of put in front of him. Obviously disappointed not to take all 3 points, because I think Rovers were good value for it. And I think the Bolton supporters' reaction as well probably proved that at the end of both halves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it was just a much needed, upgrade, really, weren't it, in terms of defensively. I think more importantly than I know they've not been scoring bucket loads, but they've been conceding a lot. And like you say, it's one of those where Dempsey, it's a scruffy goal. It's whatever you want to call it, lucky. But yeah, it's kind of hit his own, or he's hit it into the ground, or it's hit his own heel. It's a really strange goal. It's looped over Lawler, and you're thinking that's just Rovers' luck at the minute, isn't it? Any kind of, because other than that, I can't really remember them testing Lawler at all. Can you?
No, I think that was their only shot on target. And even after they scored, you were a little bit worried, weren't you, with 13 minutes still to go? Is this where the game turns? Are Bolton going to go on and get a winner? I don't think really either team afterwards looked like going on to win it. It did take the wind out of Rovers' sails a little bit, didn't it, that equaliser? But even then, they showed good determination to stay in it and not lose it completely. If you can't win a game, don't lose it, is the old adage, isn't it? Rovers did a good job of that. Bolton were throwing various players off the bench. I think Grant McCann said afterwards, didn't he, that they've got one of the biggest budgets in the league. They've got a great fan base who, 3,000 of them at the Eco Power, almost trying to suck that ball in towards the end. But Rovers stood up to it well. McGrath and Pearson, who've maybe had a little bit of criticism of late, did what was required of them. And as I said, I think the two fullbacks, Nixon and Senior, who haven't been the first choice fullbacks when everybody's been fit all of the time, but over the past couple of games, they've certainly, given themselves a chance, haven't they, of getting a run in the team.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they were great, especially I think Nixon against Bolton. I think they were both good against Stockport, weren't they? Well, they were both good against Bolton, sorry. Stockport, obviously, the Senior kind of involved in a few flashpoints with the goals, but I think he brings something different, doesn't he, to Maxwell, especially on that fullback position. I think Nixon and Sterry, both kind of give you a lot of solidity going forward and defensively. I think on the left-hand side, you're probably looking at Maxwell, who's got probably one of the best crosses in the team. Mm-hmm. And you think Senior's a bit more bite and a bit more aggression about him in there. The similar. It sounds daft, but they're similar, but they're very different as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've both got their own qualities, haven't they? And I think over the past couple of seasons, there hasn't really been much between the two, has there? Whoever Grant McCann's put in has done a good job. I know James Maxwell's had his injury issues at times, and whenever Jack Senior has been called upon, he's done a good job. I know he sort of towards the back end of last season or the season before, he got the red card, didn't he, at Morecambe, where it was a bit of, one of those tackles where you think just a bit too keen. But that's the way he plays. He's very on the edge. I think we've seen a couple of tackles in recent weeks where if it goes wrong, you can be left a little bit red-faced. But when they come off and he's taking man and ball, that's the sort of commitment and endeavour that the Rovers fans want to see. And I think Tom Nixon on the other side he's very all action, isn't he? He's up and down that right flank, and certainly no lack of trying from either of those two, which is why I think of recent weeks, when you're looking for positives, when results have been hard to come by, that's certainly been a bit of a finding, I think, for Grant McCann, the consistency of the fullbacks.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose the positives from that Bolton game, it was a shame in a way that the Luton game was called off, because I think it'd been interesting to see if they could have took that momentum forward, short space of time in terms of turnaround. But in a way, do you think that maybe, how do you view that? Do you view it as a kind of frustrating that they weren't able to kick on? I mean, if they'd have lost that game, then you're kind of back to square one, aren't you? Whereas now, as it says on screen, the cup games back to back, obviously Southampton and Fleetwood, if they go ahead, providing the weather mellows a little bit. Would they rather have a league game, do you reckon? Or is it good maybe that there's a little break between?
I think that there would have been a lot of teams that when their games were called off at the weekend would have been quite pleased. I don't think Rovers would have been one of those. I think given that it was the last league game, like you said, for a couple of weeks, and it's the end of that really busy Christmas period, I feel like Grant McCann would have wanted to throw everything at that game against Luton and almost say, okay, this is the last league game for a fortnight. We've worked hard. We haven't picked up the results that we maybe wanted or deserved in some aspects. I think that Luton game would have been a great opportunity to, end the Christmas period with a bit of cheer. If you got back to winning ways there, 4 points potentially from your first two in the new year, it starts to look very different. I think there would have been teams who were happy to have the weekend off, and maybe it will have its, advantages for a bit of rest. And of course, Broadbent went off against Bolton, didn't he? So a bit of time for him to recover potentially. But I'm sure Grant McCann would have been desperate for that game to have been on and really have a go at Luton, who'd been on a decent run, but I think had been beaten in the game before. Yeah. So a potential there to pick up 3 points. And I think it would have been really interesting to see how those couple of weeks where you've got 4 or 5 games in such a quick period of time would have come to an end, because I think Rovers would have fancied it off the back of that Bolton performance.
Yeah, and obviously I think the next one's slated to be Wimbledon away. But it'll be quite a gap, won't it, now between the New Year's Day and I think 2.5 weeks or something. So the immediate focus is now obviously the cups, as I say, if they go ahead, both home games. So we don't know what the pitch is going to be, what state the pitch is going to be in. But provide they go ahead, Southampton and Fleetwood, 2 very different tests. But obviously, good tests, I would imagine, for Rovers to try and see where they're at, especially against Southampton. No, they got battered by Middlesbrough, didn't they, the other day? But again, so much quality in that squad.
Yeah, certainly so. And I mean, you look at Southampton; they're on a great run before the manager got appointed, weren't they? And since he's got the job, they've hit a bit of a sticky patch, which is bizarre, really, isn't it? They've worked so hard to get him the job, and then it's not quite happened for them since. But the magic of the FA Cup, Southampton winners in 1976. So many people probably won't know that. Southampton, not a name you would necessarily expect to have had their hands on the trophy, but they did, all those years ago. And a little bit of, a subplot there. Billy Sharp, an ex-Southampton player. It's remarkable, really. I'm just sort of starting to do my prep ready for the weekend. And Billy Sharp, over the past 2 fixtures, Billy Sharp has scored the last 3 goals, but for 2 different clubs, which is incredible, really. The 2011-2012 season, he scored the winner for Rovers against Southampton, then left for the Saints in January. And, as so often happens in football, played against Rovers later on that season and scored a brace. So, yeah, he's got his history with Southampton. He's got plenty of goals in the FA Cup as well. I think it's a good few days for Rovers. They've been good in the Cups this season, haven't they? And it's probably a good time to face Southampton as well, given the run that they've been on. They are a big club. They're in the Premier League last season. They're a massive club at Championship level, albeit not doing so well this time around. But I think, again, we've seen it before where Rovers and Grant McCann in this competition and in the Carabao Cup, they just seem to find something that enables them to keep on progressing in this competition. And who knows, maybe they can cause another upset and then get an even bigger draw in round 4. That Fleetwood one, I think, in midweek is, again, very winnable. And we know what the EFL trophy's like. It's got its pros and cons, I think, as we've discussed on here quite a lot, haven't we, in the last few weeks and months. But I think if you can overcome that fixture again, Wembley becomes all that much closer, doesn't it, in the EFL trophy? So both games as important as each other, I think. And again, another opportunity for Rovers to just build 1 or 2 blocks ready for that Wimbledon game the week after. Yeah,
and thankfully there's no replay, so there's no chance of or no danger of having to go down to Southampton. And Fleetwood away, another one, not a million miles away, but you don't want to be going there in January, do you? No, cold ground. That's the on the field stuff sorted. Let's talk about transfers then. So less than a week into the window, but Rovers were quite brisk, weren't they? As Grant McCann said they would be, or try and be. We'll get on to the potentials or likely incomings shortly, but the 2 that are in the building, excuse me, Darren Robinson and Bailey McCann then. So what did you make to them? Because a bit of a mixed reaction from the fan base. I know obviously McCann Jr. has gone back out on loan now. But Robinson, as a prospect, I guess, if you like, a direct replacement for Charlie Crew.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Grant McCann, in different ways, knows an awful lot about both of his new recruits. I think with Robinson, he's been in the building for a while, hasn't he? They've had a good look at him. Clearly, Grant McCann likes what he sees. I think he perhaps sees a bit of himself in Darren Robinson as well. That Northern Irish grit and a bit of bite in midfield that he's got, but potentially a bit of a throwback to Matty Craig a couple of years ago and the way that he plays it. I've not seen an awful lot of Darren Robinson, but it sounds like he's a good size. He's got an eye for goal as well. So interesting to see how he slots into that midfield. Rovers have got a few options, but they're a bit bare at the moment, given that Close and Broadbent potentially both out injured. I know Close is a bit longer term. We're not quite sure on Broadbent just yet, but yeah, it's an early addition. It's one that Rovers have, they've almost had a try before you buy on him, haven't they, for the last couple of months. Derby clearly keen to or happy to let him move on. He's got a decent sized contract at Rovers, which enables them to have a look at him for the now and in the future as well. If he becomes one of the standouts, then they've got a bit of insurance, haven't they, on him as well. I think with Bailey McCann, it makes sense to an extent. The fact that he's been at Barnsley for a while now, he wasn't getting much game time there. He's been out on loan quite a lot. Rovers have taken him now. He's versatile, can play on that left hand side. Either further forward or in a back 5, back 4. So again, it's a player I know he's been put in the category of Sam Strong-Brown and different players like that. So I think that's a deal that there's no losers in it, is there? What's the worst that can happen? It's one that makes sense, and ultimately, I think, as Bailey said in his interview, I think Grant won't be going easy on him. If anything, he's going to have it harder than everybody else. So no room for sentiment, certainly with the early recruits in January.
Yeah, I think maybe a lot of people from the outside looking in and go, "Oh well, he signed his son, etc." And maybe look at the position the club's in. But I mean, it's clear he's not going to feature this season. It's not as if he's brought him into at the expense of a senior player. It's a long-term signing, isn't it? In terms of going back out on loan to Alfreton, I think it is, where he's already been. And then obviously potentially looking at him as a long-term project rather than someone that's going to obviously feature here and now.
Yeah, I think if anybody's thinking that Grant McCann's brought his son in just for the sake of it, they are very sadly mistaken. He's not that type of man or manager, is he? Just to do something like that because it's his son. I think he makes a good point in his interview about Bailey, the fact he's played, I think, 40 or 50 games at National League North, so his body is becoming used to playing men's football. I'd be very surprised if he's not out in the National League next season, potentially. And again, this is not a signing that is necessarily for the now, is it? It's, you can build him as a player, get him out on loan. And if he does do really well, he might come and have a brilliant pre-season. And Grant has a good look at him and thinks, okay, he's ready for us now. If he does go out on loan again next season, then so be it. But 40 or 50 games at National League North, yes, all right, Rovers are at a much higher level than that. But in terms of that physicality and just getting your body used to the rough and tumble of week in, week out, playing on, boggy pitches, but also playing for 3 points every week is a big difference to being in the under-23s, as we so often hear, don't we? When Rovers have got a loanee, you always ask, what's the biggest difference between playing here or being at Spurs under-23s? And it's always that, fighting for the 3 points and playing for something week on week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so those two are in. Really interesting one that's obviously developed last few days. Hakeeb Adelakun, name that kind of rings a strong bell for Rovers fans. Obviously, 18 months ago, wasn't it? Sorry, 2 years ago actually, when he first joined Rovers. Similar to where the position they're in now, of albeit league below. He comes in. Grant McCann knew him obviously from the time together at Hull, and what an impact he had that first spell. I mean, it looks, as far as we understand, that deal's going to go through soon. It might even be today, might be later this week. What do you make of that? Because it's an intriguing one. He's played at Cheltenham, hasn't he? He's kind of bumped his fitness levels up, and he's banged in a few goals for them as well. What do you make to it?
I must admit, I was a little bit surprised when it first sort of came around, and when we were hearing the noises that it was a possibility. Not in the sense of the quality of the player. I don't think that's in any doubt, is it? Was it 16 goal contributions in 21 games or something like that at the back end of season before last? He's since gone on to Salford and scored 13 goals, I think, for them last season. The quality is undoubted, isn't it, with Hakeeb Adelakun? I did think that he might have burnt his bridges with Doncaster Rovers when he turned down that contract offer. And I think what was proved there is the grass isn't always greener, is it? And that was very much on show that summer when Rovers offered him a deal. It was there for the taking. They stayed in League Two, didn't they? Lost in the playoffs. He clearly thought, and I'm not for 1 second suggesting that he was waiting for 3 months to sign for Salford. There must have been something on the table way back for him to not sign for Doncaster Rovers, because he'd had an unbelievable 6 months. Grant McCann got the best out of him. It just seemed to work for all parties for him to stay, didn't it? It didn't happen. Listen, football moves on. Then he has a good season at Salford. Then he's a free agent again. So again, it's just, those are the main question marks for me as to why does that keep happening? There must be something that's not quite, right with things off the field potentially. But on it, he is an unbelievable footballer. I mean, some of the things he was doing were way above League Two. Way above. I mean, he was scoring direct from a corner, wasn't he? He was scoring goals from all sorts of angles. And if Rovers had signed him last summer, would he still be there now? Who knows? Maybe someone would sign him anyway, because if he'd had another season like the half a year he'd had before, then I'm sure he would have had a number of suitors. It's a signing that could well keep Rovers in League One, I think. If things are right on the pitch, then, why not? It's again, relatively risk-free, isn't it? If it's a deal till the end of the season, great. Yeah. If he's the only caveat to that is if he scores a lot of goals and gets a lot of assists, the Rovers find themselves in a similar position in 6 months' time to the one they were in 18 months ago. That will remain to be seen, of course. Let's just hope he can come in and score a lot of goals as he did a couple of years ago, because for me, there's not been many with that quality where you've watched and thought he is a level above everybody else on the pitch, not just 1 week, but for 6, 7, 8 weeks in a row, wasn't it? It was incredible, the run he went on.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's, you look at those signings that January. Obviously, McGrath didn't play a lot, did he? But in that little 6 month period, but he joined at that time. TLT joined, Matty Craig, and then Adelakun. So you had that kind of spine strengthening, if you like, and that contributed to the run, didn't it? And I think that was the real moment where it really got going under McCann, this second spell. So, like you say, it ended on a bit of a sour note. I mean, the missed penalty against Crewe was his last act in a shirt, which is, I think that will always sour it a little. And then obviously what happened after that happened. So I think he's got a bit of bridge building to do, hasn't he, with the supporters as well? Certainly some. I just think it's a fascinating signing. I just think, given what's gone on since, he's done very well since for Salford and Cheltenham, but albeit in League Two. So, yeah, I think it'd be fascinating to see how he does and how it kind of pans out. And also, as you say, if it does go well, do they find themselves back at square one in the summer? So, yeah, I mean, we're expecting that to get done might even be today, possibly Wednesday. So we'll keep his eyes peeled for that, and then we'll just wrap up with that. If that happens, or when that happens, that'll be 3 in the door. How many more do you expect Rovers to get? How many more do you think could be on McCann's shopping list? Because I think we all agree that centre half's probably an area of concern.
Yeah, I would expect 1 or 2 more potentially. A lot of it depends on where Adelakun will play as well. If he's coming in and going down the middle as an option, then Rovers might not need a centre forward. But if he's coming to play out wide, then I would say another striker is a must as well, because Rovers have not scored anywhere near enough goals this season. But yeah, centre half, I think just that bit of experience in there, which is, they have got Matty Pearson, who's been around an awful long time, but I think they're missing that voice. I think at the back, that, when you consider that last season, Tom Anderson, Richard Wood, to lose both of those in the summer, I think he's looking like a bigger blow now, perhaps, than it seemed then. I'm not saying that those two would have played, loads of games at League One level, but the qualities they've got in terms of vocally and just pulling people around and calming people down when you need it, I think has been missed. I think if Rovers, it's hard to get somebody with that level of experience in at this time of the season, isn't it? There's not many available. But if Rovers can, and of course it would be a replacement for O'Riordan really as well, wouldn't it? They've lost him. So in terms of, tossing the numbers back up, centre-half does look a little bit light at the moment, because we've seen Owen Bailey go in there as a back 3, haven't we? And we all know his best position is further forward. Certainly the closest you can get him to goal now is his best position, isn't it? But yeah, I think centre-half and centre-forward are the key ones for me. I think, again, depending on where Grant McCann sees Adelakun fitting in, because if he's coming in as the third forward, the third centre forward, then maybe that's not as much of a necessity. But yeah, certainly centre back, I think, a bit of experience, a bit of know-how, and somebody who can just talk the team around the pitch a little bit, because I think that's been what's missing, especially, in away games as well, like Stockport away and Blackpool away, just that bit of a calm head at centre back.
Bit of an interesting one, actually, what you say about Adelakun, because as we are talking, Gateshead have confirmed Kyle Hurst's gone back to Rovers now. Excuse me, I know, obviously, he's not played at all this season, I don't think, off the top of my head, for Rovers before he went out. So, you look at him as a potential, that's, for counting Adelakun in, that's 5 wing options. Does that mean Hurst stays and Adelakun goes up front, or is used as a forward player? So it's a lot of interesting subplots, I guess, but I certainly agree. I think centre-half wise, you'll know better than me. McCann's first spell, did he have Butler at centre-back and obviously Anderson, and that vocal, like, as you were saying, that leader of a centre-back, which I think we all expected Pearson to be that. For whatever reason, it's turned out he's not kind of been that, has it?
No, and I think, going back to his first spell, Grant McCann, he had Butler, Joe Wright, Tom Anderson. I think in that January, he brought Paul Downing in as well from Blackburn on loan, who was brilliant. Not necessarily the most vocal, but when you had somebody like Andy Butler alongside him, again, who could just pull people from one side to the other, I think it just makes such a difference. If you can hear, can't you? Sometimes as the crowd's levels drop, sometimes you're looking for that one voice, and who can you hear? I think Andy Butler, Richard Wood, Tom Anderson, those were always the voices who you would hear. And I think sometimes it is a little bit quiet, and you are looking around thinking, right, who's pointing, who's dragging players from one position to the other, and it helps your fullbacks as well, doesn't it? Jack Senior, James Maxwell, whoever's coming in, if they've got a centre half talking them through the game, it makes things so much easier. And I think, if they could just get that one centre half in, somebody who can, and is it somebody who Grant's worked with before? Potentially. I know I'm talking completely sort of in my own head here of who may be coming in. But I think, if it's somebody he's worked with before, who maybe is looking for a bit of football, but has that, crucial skill of just being able to talk and communicate well, that could be the difference for Rovers in getting them up that table.